to the Big Five podcast from Northumbria Psychology Department. My name is Dr. Genevieve Brown, and I'll be your guide into the minds of psychology students, alumni, and researchers at Northumbria University. I'm a lecturer and a social psychology researcher in the psychology department. Each week on this podcast, I'll speak to a guest who is either a student, alumni, or researcher in the Northumbria Psychology Department. By asking them 5 big questions, we'll learn about their time studying psychology and hopefully learn some big facts about human behavior and experience. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Jenny Paterson. Hi, Jenny.
Hi there, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Jenny is a senior lecturer in the psychology department and a social psychologist who studies how different groups interact and the impacts of prejudice. She's currently a member of the international. So, Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about why you started studying intergroup interactions and prejudice, and what are some of the theories behind your work?
That's a good question, Jen. My research focus specifically looks at interracial romantic relationships and the prejudice towards them. And I got into that basically because I was fascinated by interpersonal dynamics, how people communicate with one another and respond to one another. And I'm also really interested in intergroup relations, and that specifically looks at prejudice. So I just basically combined the two to look at prejudice towards interracial romantic relationships. So some of the theories that I regularly use really centre around intergroup contact theory, which was devised by Allport in 1954. And it seems like a very simplistic theory. It suggests that when members of different groups, social groups, so that could be racial groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, whatever groups you want, when they interact with one another, it tends to reduce prejudice towards one another. Obviously, there's conditions to this. It can't be entirely negative contact. It has to be somewhat positive to have these positive effects and reductions in prejudice. So in my work with our colleagues, we look at how contact or simply knowing an interracial relationship can reduce prejudice.
So you say that you study people who have had contact with interracial relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodologies of those studies and how exactly you get at this research question?
Yeah, of course. So we can conceptualize it in many different ways. So during some of my studies, we've looked at what we call extended contact. And that is actually when somebody knows somebody in a relationship with an outgroup member. So to do this, we simply employ survey techniques. We ask people, do you know somebody who identifies as the same race as you, who is in a relationship with somebody from a different race? And then we will basically use statistical techniques to see how that contact is correlated with other factors like reduction in prejudice or affect towards other people from different races. But we also can conceptualize it through the media. So we can look at mediated contact. So for example, we can look at how if you don't know somebody who's in an interracial romantic relationship, we can see whether you've seen such a couple on the TV or in the media or wherever, and see if that also reduces prejudice. And again, we can use the survey correlational data, but we can also look at it longitudinally. So that's when we look at different time points so that we can have a better understanding of if somebody has contact at, say, time 1, does that then help change their attitudes further down the line and in time? And then we also, the ones that I particularly like, because it gets more to the cause and effect of things, is looking at using experimental methods. And that's where we can show participants, an in-group member who's either dating a fellow in-group member or an out-group member, and seeing how they respond to them. So do they think that they're compatible? And we can compare those attitudes towards those people. And then we can also link these to their actual larger outgroup attitudes, specifically looking at prejudice. Do they like outgroup members? Would they go on a date with an outgroup member? So those are the techniques.
Yeah, those are some great techniques, very typical social psychology studies, but excellent to educate our listeners about those, as we are both social psychologists. I know that you've done a very interesting study on a very specific interracial couple, Would you like to tell us a little bit about that study and any interesting findings about your Harry and Meghan research?
Yeah, of course. As you allude to, I've done 3 quite large studies looking at attitudes towards Prince Harry and Meghan, as they were formerly known, and now the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And what we've done is, obviously, my research really centres around this attitudes towards interracial romantic relationships, and this was a very big prime example of such a couple. So me and my collaborators, Professor Turner and Professor Hudson, we have managed to look at people's reactions to the couple, both at the wedding, when they had their son Archie, and then also during what the media outlets called Megxit, when they decided to step back from royal duties. We were able to look at how people's attitudes towards that couple are translated to their intergroup attitudes and prejudice more generally. So some of the interesting things, the negative surprising thing is that people still have reservations about intergroup romantic relationships. Now, if you saw the media narrative around some of the things surrounding the wedding, and especially around Archie, their child, they were talking about the race. And it was, I obviously, as a researcher, I know that the prejudice is there, but to see it so blatantly put onto the news was quite astounding. And in the 21st century, that it's still an issue. But the good and surprise, well, hopefully not too surprising because the theory suggests this, but the good part of this is what we found throughout the studies was that people who saw Harry and Meghan's relationship, if they thought other people approved of it, so the social norms surrounding that relationship, that actually led longitudinally to better intergroup attitudes. So, for example, we studied white British participants and we got them to reply to a survey about what they thought about Harry and Meghan at the time of the wedding. And then we looked at it 1 month later and what we could do, statistically controlling for certain factors. We did find that contact with the interracial couple was correlated with better attitudes towards Black people and towards mixed race people. So what we're trying to argue is that although interracial romantic relationships are demonized sometimes in the media and stigmatized definitely, they have the power to actually improve those prejudicial attitudes. So that was a pretty neat finding that we were very happy to see. So not only from a theoretical point of view, but also for society as well.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm curious because I know intergroup theory, contact theory states that the interaction needs to be a positive one. So did you see anything different after Megxit? Because there was such a scandal when Harry and Meghan decided that they wanted to kind of step back from the royal family and have a little distance from that kind of life. How did people respond to that? Was that seen as a negative event that then kind of poisoned the waters of that intergroup contact, or were people still accepting of that? And was that being presented in the media still a positive thing to reduce people's prejudice?
That's a great question, Genevieve. Well done. Yeah, great. What we found was that Megxit, although it was especially a relatively negative commentary around it, because the contact, so when we conceptualize contact, it's between Harry and Meghan rather than the participant and the person, because obviously they don't know them. So it was still looking at an in-group member with an out-group member, and that remained positive. So generally what we found was the attitudes still had that positive, the contact still had that positive effect on attitudes. However, what was really interesting, we also included a new measure in which we asked participants, to what extent do you think Meghan has tainted the royal family? And we use the word tainted because we've looked at some of the other social psychology literature around biracial people and having children and without group members. And what the racist remarks often is about, oh, well, they're not entirely white now, or they're not entirely Black now. So they've tainted this in-group identity. And what we found is that actually when we used that variable within the Megxit study, we did find that, and it cancelled the positive contact out. So I do very much think, as you say, when it's negative contact or a negative narrative surrounding that contact, that can diminish these positive aspects of contact. So it's really important to understand the context, because it's not always going to lead to positive reactions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. This also makes me think a bit, I want to ask you about the impact of your work, but I was thinking about how seeing this couple in the media has hopefully reduced some prejudice towards biracial couples. Do you think that we could extend this idea to the idea of representation in fictional media as well? Do you think that is an important area where, creators could think about hoping to reduce prejudice by presenting biracial couples in media?
Yes, definitely. Obviously, there's, as we talked about it, the presentation of the couples will be interesting, because if you have a couple, especially a fictional couple, if you have them being too positive, it's not believable. But then again, you don't want them really negative and they have a horrific breakup, because that might have negative effects on attitudes. However, I very much agree where I think there should be more representation. So it gets to the fundamentals of intergroup contact theory. If you see something positive, it reduces your anxiety about that contact for yourself, and that makes you more accepting of others and accepting of and willingness to engage with people from different outgroups. So that could be interracial romantic relationships, or it could be any type of relationship. So I definitely think there's an aspect where media can definitely have a positive influence, and this has been shown in other realms. If you look at mediated intergroup contact with male gay couples, I think there was a good study about the representation of Will and Grace, and that actually helped to reduce prejudice towards gay men just by simply watching it, even though it was probably an overly stereotypical comedic presentation of it. It did help to reduce prejudice. So I definitely think it could be rolled out to a wide variety of relationships.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you. Is there any other impact from your research that you think is really important for our listeners to hear about?
That's a difficult one because this is quite a nascent literature, so it's just starting to get going, because intergroup contact theory has been around for decades, and it's had really good impact in, for example, it was one of the reasons why schools in the south of the US were desegregated. But its application to romantic relationships is only quite new, so the impact is still being seen. I hope just by talking about it, it brings people's attention to it and go, oh yeah, actually, I didn't think about that, or yeah, what are my attitudes? Should they be challenged or not? So hopefully for those in couples and those who are supporting them, it's just being aware of the issues and the marginalisation that these couples encounter, and hopefully reducing the prejudice towards them.
Yeah, definitely. That's an excellent goal of this research.